staffing in the cost center. As far as the ELSO database and regulatory goes, that really falls on just John and I. We really take care of the ELSO database. And if you see up there, I'm the adult coordinator and he's pediatric. So I take care of the adult ELSO patients. He takes care of the pediatric ones. So we kind of split the load a little bit, which is nice. Those of you who do that know it is a heavy load. And then the regulatory, we really kind of manage all of our guidelines and equipment PMs, and then we get, with our physician support as well as Dr. Nicolato, approval on our guidelines to be finalized and shared with the team. All right, Sherry, next two. So the respiratory staffing I talked about, it's a little siloed. So there's a lot of communication that goes on between John and myself and the respiratory leadership. They take care of all of our ECMO specialist staffing because right now all of our ECMO specialists are respiratory therapists. So that's where it lives. And they kind of have to share the load between the respiratory department and staffing the team as well as our ECMO team. So we keep this spreadsheet to kind of show where there might be some gaps in staffing. And you can see right now we really try to hold through with 3 ECMO specialists coverage at all time and then an ECMO primer. And it gets a little dicey at nights. There's a lot of gaps there. And that's kind of where we see a lot of our problems. There is SAI on nights, another ECMO specialist that works PRN. So he's kind of available to help. And so you can see he's kind of scheduled there on the right side when there's those big holes. We also use, when in time of need, contract companies to help staffing. But really, it is a ton of communication between our groups to make sure that everything's covered when things are getting really busy. All right, Sherry. One more. So I'm going to talk about equipment and disposables. So really, there's 2 ECMO coordinators because there's 2 perfusion teams. There's the adult side at VCU, and then there's the pediatric perfusion team at CHOR. We have 1 ECMO program, but 2 perfusion teams. So for the adult perfusion ECMOs, the initiation team, it's really just the cardiac surgeon and the perfusionists that attend those. And then you may include a cardiac surgery fellow, very uncommonly a cardiac PA, and our ECMO primer. We maintain 2 clear prime circuits at all times, and then 1 each is located in the OR and in the cardiac surgery ICU, and we just utilize those as needed. So they get recycled through, and they're always on backup for emergencies or for our patients that are on. Our pediatric perfusion team, their initiation team, it's really composed of general surgery and the pediatric perfusionist. That surgery team, it consists of a surgeon, whether that's a cardiac surgeon or general surgeon, it depends on the patient, a first assistant, and then a nurse and scrub. They come to wherever the patient needs cannulated and set up. And then it may also include a surgery fellow and a primer. They also maintain clear primed circuits for emergencies. They have 2 clear primed and 2 dry infant circuits, and 1 each of those is located in the NICU and PICU. The reason for that is because our NICU and PICU are in 2 separate buildings. So we can't have 1 ECMO workroom between the 2 because they're like 10 minutes apart when you walk to them. And then we have the 2 clear prime pediatric ECMO circuits, 1 each for small and large patients. So we maintain our clear primed actually for 60 days, and I know ELSO recommends 30. This is based off of 2 different studies. One is done by, go ahead and Sherry. One is done by Bengston, and then 1 is done by TAN. And this just kind of proves that 60 days still guarantees that your oxygenator is efficient and the sterility is not broken. And reasons we did this is a lot of it, as you can see, we have to have a lot of clear primed circuits for our pediatric population that we were kind of getting a lot of waste. And we were trying to not have to tear down circuits and waste them due to just expiration dates of 30 days. And that's helped a ton, really, just trying to cut down on our waste that we have. So our adult ECMO equipment, we have a cardio help. We utilize the HLS-7 with the cardio equip and just the Seacrest gas mixer. We always put an analyzer in line to help manage our FiO2 to double check those gas mixers because they're a little antiquated and old. And these live on that Gedinga Sprinter cart. We use capsule neurons for our connectivity, and that sends our ECMO data to our patient's Epic chart. And then one back, sorry, Sherry. We also have the Spectrum ECMO. So we kind of set this up on a smaller base. So you can see it's a the 12-inch workstation with the CP22 and the ventilation light. A couple of them have the ventilation module, a couple of them have that Secris mixer. And then we use the Nautilus Smart Oxy, and that's just to really get us pressures post-oxy without having to introduce another transducer in line to do that. You can see with this IV pole, it's a little different of a setup. It's great because it's compact. VCU just started a lung program, so that's kind of why we wanted this, something a little easier to push around so when we're walking our lung patients. And with that, we utilize that HTP 1500 heater because it can just be mounted right on the IV pole. The basic IV pole we ordered, it's got the biggest base. It's actually super sturdy. And that was kind of the hardest part about getting like an IV pole setup is that all this is so heavy, especially that workstation, but it is great, very sturdy. For our pediatric ECMO equipment, we have the CardioHelps with the 50 HLS. These are size different, so if they're greater than 30 kilograms, the arterial tubing's 3/8 inch. If it's 15 to 30 kilograms, then we use that 1/4 inch arterial tubing. And it kind of comes with all the rest of the basic supplies that the adult side has, ancillary equipment for heater coolers and whatnot. The pediatric team has utilized the CoreSight ECMO carts, which are great because they're they're pretty sturdy and they're like really cheap, honestly. So you can get one, I think they're around $5,000 is all, where that getting a spritter cart is like 20 grand. So it's a lot. And then utilizes that same capsule neuron for connectivity. And our newborn infant ECMO circuit, so this one is a little outdated. We're working on getting some new equipment here. We still utilize the Rotaflow and the Eurosets infant oxy. I'm sure you all still miss the Quadrox like we do. We have the heater coolers, either the CardioQuip or that HTP 1500, and then we use the System M spectrum monitor for flows and venous sats. That thing is really outdated, and that is really the one that we're using to push to get new equipment. So still utilize that and the DLP pressure boxes, those red boxes that have been used forever. Typically mounted on those is that Medfusion pump as well. So our adult ECMO cannulation cart, we have 2 of these. They're very mobile. One is in the OR, one is in the cardiac surgery ICU unit. We've updated it so we have pictures instead of just labels on it for easy to grab and for people who are helping to get instruments and stuff out of these carts for us. They're pretty small, they're pretty light, they roll easy. To help with inventory and outdates, we've incorporated just a central ECMO cannulation box that sits on top, and it's just lockboxed all the time. And then I keep track of like a little note card on the side of it with like the first expiration dates in September of this year, because that doesn't get opened a ton. So that way it's not getting opened and looked through monthly with the rest of the cart as we manage that inventory. We also have separate pediatric and infant ECMO cannulation carts, so you can see the pediatric one on the left side, tons of cannula space because you need cannulas for whatever size over there. And then the infant cart, it's really compact and easy since everything's so much smaller. Go one more. All right, so I'm going to talk about our education next. This is really coordinated by John and myself. We put a lot of time into our education for our ECMO specialists. Go ahead, Sherry. So there's really 2 main things for our ECMO specialists that we take care of, the initial training course and then the continuing education for them. So the initial training course, we have some specific requirements. Like I said, our program's all registered respiratory therapists. They have to have at least 2 years of critical care experience and at least 6 months of experience at VCU or CHOR. The selection process begins where the candidates submit an application to their respiratory manager and it is approved, and then they are interviewed by a panel that's composed of the RT manager, John and myself, and a senior ECMO specialist. We kind of have a scoring system, and they're very standard interview questions about how they handle, stress, working with others, that sort of thing. And we select them based off of those interview scores. Class size is typically 8 plus 2 alternates. The pre-training course for the education is really just we ask them to complete that ELSO ECMO 101 introductory modules that are free online. And then we have the full training course. So it is in total 7 days. So the first 6 days, they're 8 hours long. The mornings revolve around that didactic learning. The afternoons are labs and simulations. And then we have at the end 1 full day that's simulation only. We follow that with a review day, and they have a written examination. They have to have greater than 80% to pass. Once they pass their written exam, then they sit a total of 120 hours of bedside training. We kind of split that up between the 3 different pump modules that we have. So 36 hours each on the Spectrum and Cardio Help, and then 48 hours on that infant circuit. And then once they've completed their training on each circuit, so these checkoffs are kind of done 3 different times, they'll do a final competency checkoff with either John or myself for each pump setup. So this is just an example. Sherry, you can kind of go through these quickly of our training course schedule. So you can see John and I do take a heavy load, but we ask others, such as Dr. Nicolato, to come and give discussions based on their area of expertise. And you can just keep going, Sherry. There's a lot of didactic at the beginning and then lab and practice at the end. And then when we get around to day 7, we really just focus on everything being hands-on and those emergency procedures. So the final competency, this is kind of what it looks like with John and I. We have them go through a performance review. So we come in at the beginning of their shift and we sit with them. We go through each of these things with them. Most of this is just letting them do it and making sure they are comfortable and that they do it correctly, especially with the performance review. We kind of just hands off and watch and make sure they're able to do this. And then we follow that up with knowledge base. And this is just kind of discussions that we have, making sure that they understand all of these concepts. It's really kind of an oral exam, and we go through everything. And then at the end, we sign off. If there's anything extra we did, say set up CRT and connect to our circuit or change out a stopcock or anything of that, we write it on there and then try to list some goals and follow up with them after 6 months. So this is our class. They were very proud, so I thought it'd be nice to send a picture in here. So this is our last class that we had a year ago now almost. We do have a little pathway for training for new hires that already have ECMO specialist experience. So they kind of have to have the same requirements as a registered respiratory therapist, but that documentation of prior education. And this is reviewed by the respiratory manager and the ECMO coordinators. And really that, can be a certificate from ANSET or ELSO, or it could be something that we put on internally and they give us a contact, somebody to reference that we can follow up and that they've had this. And then we make them also go through that bedside training. We just tone it down a little bit at 72 hours and they do that final competency with John and I. We hold for continuing education quarterly sessions. These are all led and designed by John and myself. They're 8-hour sessions with 3 sessions to attend, so we can split up the whole ECMO specialist group into 3 groups. So they're all month long, 3 sessions that just repeat themselves, same sessions, so they come to 1. We talk about, ECMO case reviews in each age population, and then we always try to pick each session like a special interest topic. So some recent ones with CRT, TAG, and ECPR. John and myself also lead a journal club that just him and I kind of put on to share new things with the ECMO specialists that we could maybe incorporate into our program. We always practice in the afternoon emergency simulations. You can see in the photo on the right. This is our team doing air handling. We try to make it fun. These were timed air handling in groups, and so everybody got to do it, and there was a little prize at the end. We have 1 written exam a year that they have to pass, and then we have a minimal requirement of 100 hours bedside each specialist has to sit. We also incorporated newly into our program within the last couple years primers. So I'll kind of go through that quickly. So the initial training course, they have to be an ECMO specialist with at least just 1 year of experience. We have 1 session for them that's 8 hours long. It's both didactic and lab. You can see the example of the outline on the right. It's pretty heavy didactic in the morning, and then we do lab stations in the afternoon, and we really focus on that blood priming and initiation because that was what really garnered the need for primers at our institution. Was, the perfusionists respond from home on call, but when you have to come in and blood prime a circuit, it takes a lot of time, so we kind of needed people in-house. We also hold continuing education, so there's 2 sessions a year with our primers. They're full-day sessions. They're almost all hands-on. We practice ECMO initiations with a full simulation. You can see one of our primers here who is cannulating, so they kind of understand the process of cannulating. They know what they need to hand up, what needs to happen with that. We kind of talked about, making sure heparin is given and that they're also looking out for that when they're seeing these cannulas go in. And then we always practice emergency simulation. So oxygenator changeouts, our primers help the perfusionists with that, with the air handling and everything else. They act as our kind of first response when things go wrong. So we kind of give them a little extra training and show them where all this equipment lives in the perfusion world so that way they can go get it while we're on our way in. But really, with our program and our structure, it just takes a lot of collaboration between our team management and the ECMO coordinators. When we're scheduling all of these training sessions, we have to make sure that they have coverage in the respiratory department and our ECMOs as well. So there's tons of collaboration that goes on, but it works. Like you saw, there's some holes in our staffing, but there's, we're always trying to improve that. All right. Are there any questions? Thank you. Anything online, Sherry? Any questions online?
Yeah. Did you want to ask something?
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions online, any virtual?
If you have any questions online, feel free to come off of mute to ask your questions. Okay. It was so good, Brandi. No questions.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
John.
Actually, does anyone in the in-person group or online want to comment on how their program structure might be a little bit different and why that different structure works specifically for their at their institution?
Sure. So John asked, for those of you, if you can't hear him, if anybody online or in would like to comment about how their program structure difference and how that works for their institution.
Actually, there is a question from Amber. Do you use perfusionists to do circuit exchanges, oxygenator exchanges, or are the primers doing those?
We use perfusionists. So the perfusionists come in for all initiations, exchanges, oxy changeouts. Our primers kind of act as like to get everything ready. They get the equipment where it needs to go in the room set up so we can just walk in. We do actually, at least in the adult side, our surgeons also take call for ECMO from home. So we don't have that coverage in-house 24/7 from them either. So typically the perfusionists get there before our surgeons do. So it's never been an issue for them to wait on us. I don't think so in the peds world, has there, John? Usually when we're doing them, we change them out, earlier rather than later when it's more emergent, so we can kind of plan it.
Okay. Anyone else online have anything, any other questions, or anyone anywhere in person or online, you have anything you wanted to share about the difference in practices? Do you have any questions that you want to ask?
Well, so obviously with the cardio help, it's the whole circuit. We do components with that spectrum setup and switch out the Nautilus oxygenator. This was like a huge and a new guideline that we got once we got those. So it typically is a perfusionist, the primer, and then the ECMO coordinator really takes kind of 3 people to help do that. And we all do it bedside. We've done a couple recently. They went very well. It was a little bit of a new practice. Our surgeons actually come in and do our circuit exchanges, so it's a little different for the perfusionists to do it. And the pediatric side, you guys usually do the whole circuit, right, John? For the infant.
For the brain, we have done a couple of isolated oxygenator changeouts, a couple of isolated critical pump changeouts. For the most part, though, as Brandi said, we do change the entire infant circuit, so just right up at the cannulas, and the perfusionists actually do the circuit change.
So he said some component and some circuit changes.
You're going to be different. The on-split program. We'll call our RT. We are a perfusion-based program, but we don't use perfusion for anything. We're standalone completely. Everyone that is an ECMO specialist is either a nurse, a perfusionist, or a respiratory therapist. Kind of split in half between RT, nursing, and RT. Our manager, well, the director is perfusion. Under that is the manager of ECMO's respiratory therapy. There's 4 senior specialists. One of those all kind of focuses on different stuff like you guys do. Then we have our staff there, our staff specialists. All of our specialists are primers. So everyone has the capability of priming systems, blood programming systems, changing out oximeters, changing out full systems as a whole, we always have 4 people in house. One person's the most experienced person typically, that has almost probably been there for 5-10 years. We don't call perfusion in for kind of anything. They're on the page to activate to go on ECMO.
I know, I think sure.
Our group is kind of so self-sufficient that the perfusionist typically doesn't have to come in. Now, in the operating room, we're doing almost all of our lung transplants on ECMO. There's a perfusionist there with us. So we back the perfusionist, or the perfusionist backs us for doing lung transplantation. So for us, we kind of rely on a standalone program that also covers the whole house, Children's Hospital, plus the adults as well. But we're not separated by, a 10-minute walk. All of our stuff's in the same building. That kind of makes it easier.
Thank you, Dustin. Yeah, I know we've talked about the differences in our program, and I presented all of this in a little caveat there. We're trying to kind of change our program structure because of the issues that we've had with staffing. So it'll, maybe I'll give another update once we get through with that. All right.
All right. Well, thank you, Brandi.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, or actually Eve has her hand up. Eve, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
I do. Can you guys hear me?
Hold on, Eve, we can hardly hear you.
Yes. Why can't we not hear you?
Can I get, is that any better? Hello?
Give me 1 second, Eve.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and try now.
All right. How is that better?
Yeah.
Kind of. Do you want me to type it?
No, go ahead. We hear you now.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to be here, and hello from Austin, Texas. And I wonder, I might have missed a little bit at the very beginning, Brandi, but did you talk about your actual staffing with patients on ECMO, that is 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, or what your ratio may be, and does that vary based on patient acuity or like cannulation configuration or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I didn't talk about, sorry. I did not talk about that, so thank you for bringing it up. We try to utilize 1-to-1, and it is 1 ECMO specialist per pump, and then 1 nurse also per pump patient. But we kind of cohort our adult patients more often, so they'll sit up to 3, our ECMO specialists, but they're always 1-to-1 with nursing, so there's only 1 nurse per patient every time, and then our ECMO specialist can sit up to 3 pumps in the adult side. When we're really, really tight on staffing, we'll try to cohort some pediatric patients. It's not often that we do that since they're kind of more labor intensive. We run medications through our infant and pediatric circuits, so the ECMO specialists are kind of needed a little more hands-on in those rooms. But all of it really kind of revolves around the staffing component, what we can and can't cover, and when they're needed. I will say we try to follow some guidelines to make sure the patients, are stable when they're cohorting and that sort of thing. It can get away from us a little bit and just takes our ECMO specialists kind of speaking up and being like, this is not safe. I walked that patient for 30 minutes and never laid eyes on the other one. We need some help up here. So we kind of rely on them to tell us when it's not okay to cohort.
Okay, Eve is shaking her head.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Comments? Okay, I see some shaking heads. No? Okay, we can move on.
All right.
Thank you so much, Brandi, for a wonderful presentation. Just a reminder, well, I know you all didn't hear this online because we were muted. CME is offered for this session. Please check the chat for instructions on how to claim your credit. You have 7 days or 6 days to claim your credit before it expires. And please know this meeting is optimized for in-person attendance. If you hear, audio is not right, just put us in the chat and we'll try to adjust accordingly. But we hope to see you in person next time. But up next, we have an amazing team of champions for this work group. And our next champion is John, who's going to talk about the article that was shared. Go ahead, John. Tell me when to advance.
Hi, thank you very much, Sherry, for the introduction and for your excellent organization. Thank you to all our in-person attendees and to all of our attendees who joined us online. I'm really quite excited and pleased to provide this journal club review and hopefully get some really good discussion as to some of the questions that this article brought to mind. So we're looking at a comparison of pediatric versus arterial cannulas. Or pediatric arterial cannulas versus a standard vascular introducer sheath as a distal perfusion catheter in VA ECMO. And this study was just published at the end of 2025 by our friends just down the road in Louisville, Kentucky. So what we're looking at is exactly this. What do we use for a distal perfusion catheter in veno-arterial ECMO? Either a pediatric arterial cannula versus a standard vascular introducer sheath. Just by way of background, we're all aware, of course, that limb ischemia is one of the most commonly reported complications in patients on femoral veno-arterial ECMO. The ELSO guidelines have a formal recommendation for placing a distal perfusion cannula to prevent limb ischemia, and there's the reference article from the SIO journal. So just back it up one. So a distal perfusion catheter is often accomplished using a 5 to 8 French vascular introducer sheath, and it's connected to the arterial cannula lure port via the sidearm of the catheter. And of course, there's a picture. We all do something fairly similar to this configuration and setup. These distal perfusion catheters are commonly placed up front prophylactically to prevent limb ischemia, or maybe reactively once there's some indication or suspicion that limb ischemia might be pending. But regardless of when or how they're placed, limb ischemia still remains a very frequently reported complication to the ELSO database. So this group of authors previously demonstrated that increasing French size of the introducer sheath, so going to a 5 to a 6 to a 7, did not really improve distal limb blood flow dynamics. And they further found that there was a trade-off a little bit between the catheter size and the degree of vascular occlusiveness. So as they used a larger introducer sheath, they reported a slight increase in the actual vessel occlusiveness of that catheter, and that was published again back in 2025. Interestingly, of course, I guess intuitively, we all know that these introducer sheaths, they have their intended usage. So they're meant for placing guide wires or diagnostic catheters, vascular instrumentation, or for pressure monitoring, blood sampling, administering fluids or medications or contrast media. But really what they're not intended for is providing supportive blood flow down to the distal limb. So these authors speculated that just the mechanical construction of these vascular introducer sheaths with their stopcock and their 90-degree sidearm angle was sort of creating choke points of resistance to blood flow through the circuitry. And they hypothesized that a pediatric arterial cannula may provide more favorable distal limb hemodynamics. So for materials and methods, they created in-house a mock flow loop to represent or recreate femoral ECMO for testing both introducer sheaths and pediatric arterial cannulas under both static and dynamic conditions. So for comparison, they looked at the Super Aeroflex percutaneous sheath introducer from Aeroteleflex in the 5 French, 6 French, and 8 French sizes, all 11 centimeters of length. And they also looked at the pediatric one-piece arterial cannula from Medtronic, looking at the 6 French, 8 French, and 10 French size, and again, all 22.9 centimeters in length. Their static mock flow loop utilized an affinity centrifugal pump from Medtronic, some Tygon tubing, and a reservoir with some transonic flow probes and standard pressure transducers. They primed this setup with 660 mils of a glycerol and distilled water-based solution, warmed to 37 degrees Celsius to sort of approximate the viscosity of blood. Oh, just back it up one. So the catheters and the cannulas were placed in the circuit in random order and then tested independently at speeds of 500, 1500, and 500 RP, back down to 500 RPMs in 100 mil increments and decrements. So they generated 2 data sets for each of the catheters and cannulas. And this was used to determine the pressure flow curves and relative resistance with all of the pump flow passing directly through the distal perfusion cannula, and then tested again for vascular occlusiveness with all the pump flow going around the distal perfusion cannula. So this is the schematic of their circuit setup, again with the direct testing of catheter resistance with all the flow going through either the introducer sheath or the pediatric arterial cannula, and then with the catheter or cannula clamped off and all the circuit flow going around the catheter or cannula. So they were able to determine both the resistive component and the obstructive component of each of these devices. The dynamic flow loop was set up using Tygon tubing of various sizes to simulate adult vasculature. They used a silicone ventricle with valves in place in the mitral and aortic position. And this was acquired through Derby City Supply and then powered by a Thoratec old school VAD pneumatic driver. Those of us who have been around for a long time remember the giant washing machine Thoratec driver. So that's what they used to power this pneumatic ventricle. This setup was primed again with that same glycerol distilled water solution to simulate some viscosity, warmed to 37 degrees Celsius, and then the VAD pump was tuned to sort of simulate heart failure conditions. So a heart rate of 80, a cardiac output of 3 liters per minute, mean arterial pressure of 50, and a central venous pressure of 20 millimeters of mercury. Then to the static flow loop model, they added a Eurosets adult ECMO oxygenator, a Medtronic 15 French arterial and 25 French femoral venous cannulas, and that completed the ECMO portion of the circuit. And so there's a schematic of this really ingenious setup that their biomedical engineering department created for them in-house. So you can see sort of the merging together of the static ECMO circuit, which is now incorporated into the dynamic circuit with the heart pump, and the number of flow probes and pressure transducers that they incorporated into the circuit to get all these measurements to determine relative resistances and occlusiveness and flows throughout the entire circuit. So each distal perfusion catheter was connected to the arterial return line or the pediatric cannula was inserted into the dynamic loop directly into the right superficial femoral artery. The experimental conditions for each distal perfusion cannula was no distal perfusion cannula in place, distal perfusion cannula inserted into the system but clamped, so there was no flow going through it to assess the obstructiveness. The distal perfusion cannula inserted and patent, and each of these conditions was tested using ECMO pump speeds at 0, 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000 RPM, again, both incrementally and decrementally to generate 2 data sets. So for the results, just looking at the static ECMO flow loop, the distal perfusion catheter flow was highest through the 10 and 8 and 6 French pediatric arterial cannulas, respectively. At 1,500 RPM, the 10 French cannula was able to deliver 0.97 liters per minute of flow through the catheter. The flow was actually lowest through the 5, 6, and 8 French introducer sheaths, respectively. And under the same conditions, the 5 French catheter allowed 0.18 liters per minute, the 6 French 0.19 liters per minute, and the 8 French introducer sheath 0.198 liters per minute. So what you can see on the graph is the relatively small increase in actual delivered flow through the introducer sheaths, regardless of which size sheath you use, regardless if it's a 5, 6, or an 8 French. The obstructive resistance, as you can imagine, was highest in the 10 French pediatric arterial cannula, and then lowest in the 6 French arterial cannula and the 5 French introducer sheath when flow around each distal perfusion catheter was measured. However, the direct flow resistance was much greater than the vascular obstructive resistance for each of the distal perfusion catheters tested. And at any given driving pressure, there was really minimal difference in the obstructive resistance to distal flow of any of the tested distal perfusion catheters compared to having no distal perfusion cannula in site. So adding a distal perfusion cannula, regardless of which model or which size you use, really doesn't add any significant degree of vascular obstruction to the overall delivery of flow to the distal limb. So what that indicates is that anywhere between a 5 and a 10 French, the distal perfusion cannula size has minimal impact on vessel obstruction, and the distal limb flow is mostly dependent on the internal distal perfusion catheter resistance. So again, what they saw was looking at their pressure and flow data. The distal perfusion cannula flow was obviously much higher than the obstructive resistance, and particularly as the graph on the right demonstrates that the difference between having no distal perfusion cannula or having a distal perfusion cannula in place, really there was no difference in resistance. But looking at the flow directly through the distal perfusion cannula, that's where the greatest flow gains were found. So looking at the dynamic flow loop results, and this is where it gets interesting, is when you actually put it into the working model of cardiac failure. The 3 pediatric arterial cannulas provided an increase in the cumulative flow to the distal right superficial femoral artery. The 3 introducer sheaths provided equal or actually less cumulative flow to the right superficial femoral artery. And the cumulative flow was calculated as the right superficial artery obstructed flow plus the distal perfusion cannula net flow. The right femoral profundal artery flow actually increased with increasing size of all tested distal perfusion cannulas. So the bigger cannula, the bigger distal perfusion cannula that was placed in the right superficial femoral artery, the more blood flow actually was delivered consequently down the right femoral profundal artery. The 3 pediatric arterial cannulas also resulted in a much more balanced right leg to left leg flow index, with the 10 French cannula providing a right leg, left leg index of 0.93 compared to the 3 introducer sheaths. The 5 French and 6 French catheter gave a 0.67 right leg to left leg flow balance compared to having no distal perfusion cannula providing a 0.64 right leg to left leg flow balance index. And there on the graphs, we can see again with the degree of flow down the right superficial femoral artery with no distal perfusion catheter in place, distal perfusion catheter in place but clamped, and the distal perfusion catheter in place and patent. So you can really see the small degree of increased flow that the introducer sheaths provide relative to the flow that the 6, 8, and 10 French pediatric arterial cannulas provide. And then comparing the amount of flow through the cannulas versus minus the flow loss due to the DPC's intravascular obstructiveness, giving you a overall net flow contribution of the distal perfusion cannula. And so just looking at the different contributions of the various different introducer sheaths, the pediatric arterial cannulas come out as the clear winner for providing flow dynamics down to the distal limb. And this last graph is a bit of a busy one, but again, the thing it was mostly focusing on was the flow contributions of each of the introducer sheaths versus the cannulas, but almost more significantly, the increase in flow provided to the right profundal artery and the right leg, left leg flow balance with obstruction with both the ECMO cannula and the distal perfusion catheter, and getting that sort of equilibration of blood flow down each of the limbs. So discussion points from this article. Vascular introducer sheaths are, of course, commonly used as distal perfusion catheters for femoral veno-arterial ECMO. They're typically incorporated via the arterial cannula lock port with a short extension tubing connected to the sidearm sheath of the with a stopcock. What happens, though, of course, is these small diameter connections were surmised to be the flow limiting points in the system. What the biomedical engineers found was that each introducer sheath stopcock hole and the connection tubing inner diameter measured 0.061 inches using a pin gauge. Regardless of which French size introducer sheath you use, they were all limited by the little flow ports inside the stopcock and the connection tubing itself. So the restrictive inner diameter and then that 90-degree connection point was surmised to also possibly contribute to increased shear forces and increased risk of hemolysis in our ECMO patients. Other discussion points from the article, the obstructive resistance of all the distal perfusion catheters was actually determined to be minimal relative to the direct flow through the distal perfusion catheter, independent of which size catheter was used. All the distal perfusion catheters were, of course, placed in parallel to the ECMO arterial cannula, and of course, parallel placement increases or decreases the resistance and increases cumulative right superficial artery flow, but also increases total ECMO flow without reducing flow in the aorta or the vena cava. So regardless of how much additional flow gets directed through the distal perfusion catheter, it doesn't really generate any kind of a steal phenomenon from the central circulation. So central veno-arterial ECMO flow is still maintained, and that's an important take-home point. But the authors did conclude that the pediatric arterial cannula, when used for distal perfusion cannulation, resulted in more favorable overall hemodynamic fits with an increased right superficial femoral artery cumulative flow, better right to left leg flow balance, and increased total ECMO flow. The authors did, of course, recognize some limitations to this study, particularly in that they only tested one brand of each introducer sheath and pediatric arterial cannula. They also noted that the 6 French Medtronic pediatric arterial cannula had a substantially different taper in its contour and tip compared to the 8 and 10 French arterial cannulas. Of course, they recognized that their glycerol solution is not blood, so they were unable to actually test in this model for hemolysis. And also only one size of femoral, arterial, and venous ECMO cannula was tested in this model. Of course, these all lead to the differences between this being an in vitro benchtop study or analysis versus an actual in vitro investigation. And as such, their dynamic flow model was really unable to test for different patient sizes or vessel caliber because they were just using standardized Tygon tubing as their circulatory model. And then, of course, being a benchtop study versus an in vivo investigation, they're not really able to replicate the physiology of the microvasculature and the effects of inflammatory and neurohumoral responses. So really, to get us into our own discussion, I wanted to kind of bring it up to the group to discuss, well, what type and configuration of distal perfusion cannula does your center use? And looking at that a little more closely, do you still see the occasional signs of limb ischemia in the cannulated limb or other associated limb complications? How do you monitor your distal limb perfusion and assess for ischemia? Is it on physical exam with temperature and pulse check and color and cap refill? Are you using Doppler flow assessments? Do you look at pulse oximeter waveform on the distal limb? Do you use a NIRS on the distal limb for comparison? And in the end, does this evidence warrant us, any of us, considering a potential change in our practice?
In their little computer.
And so with that, I'll open up the floor to questions.
Learning, I think. Yes. Okay, yeah, that could be it. Well, it's not like bad, it's actually amazing. So you like it? Yeah.
Is it in regular school or you?
Regular school.
Yeah, just so at
Two
VCU,
really
we
cool
do use the
classes. I recommend
catheters.
paying more attention
And
to the one
just
as say
seeing these
some.
this data, I would be open to using the pediatric cannula. It does make sense to me that the flow restriction is through the toggles, the stopcocks and the connections. So yeah, I think you probably will get, I mean, it makes sense to me that you will get better flow through a pediatric cannula. I don't know if I'd use a 10 French, probably an 8 French, but
Yeah, probably somewhere in the middle of the road there is kind of the biggest bang for the buck.
right. And also placing them percutaneously, you have a bigger area to repair after would be
Yes.
the,
Depending on which pediatric arterial cannula brand you're using, some may have to be placed by surgical cut down.
Mhm.
The ones we currently have on inventory can be placed by cut down, percutaneously by Seldinger, or even a semi-Seldinger technique.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it makes sense. I'd try it. I'd do it.
Other questions or comments from our in-person attendees or online?
I think what's interesting is we went backwards. So we used to do 8 French pediatric cannulas. That was our standard of practice. And then went into using sheaths, which is what we've done, I think, pretty consistently since like 2020, 2021. We haven't had any increase in limb ischemia. We use nearest monitoring in the legs majority of the time. Most likely relying on Doppler assessment and just physical exam to see if you're perfusing well enough. I will say that we've had more pseudoaneurysm repairs in the RSFA or the LSFA compared to when we were using pediatric cannulas. Is that operator or device? I don't know. I think this kind of brings to the forefront the lack of data collection when it comes to ELSO, because the 3 questions that are relative to that is, do you have limb ischemia because you don't have a distal perfusion cannula? It doesn't collect. Do you have limb ischemia because you already have one in place? You only capturing compartment syndrome and amputation. And so currently the registry lacks the ability to appropriately answer these questions for us, because we're not collecting, did your patient have a DVT during the run or after? Did your patient have, an arterial thrombus in their leg? Did you have signs of poor perfusion despite having a DPC? So I think this kind of brings up kind of bigger things when it comes to
Was your patient a brittle diabetic with peripheral?
Correct. So, I think when it comes to when you've already changed your practice, how do you convince your medical staff that maybe you need to go back? I'm definitely going to be sharing this out to the group because I think this warrants a lot more discussion at our institution. I'll let you know where we end up with that.
the other aspect that I think about is we do have hemolysis. And so we monitor our legs by lactate and, signs and symptoms, but usually if we see the lactate going up, and we haven't had any ischemic limbs in a very long time, as long as we use the catheters, but we do have hemolysis. We are giving like a unit of blood every day to our cases, and we don't really have a good place where there's blood loss that we should be doing that. So maybe it is the hemolysis because we don't really monitor that much. That would be an easy thing probably to check. If we did a couple, we have enough data to compare it. Yeah.
And I know we have some experience between the adult ECMO side of our program and the pediatric side, because I know that one of our surgeons has periodically used a pediatric arterial cannula for distal perfusion, and our pediatric surgeon, if he cannulates femorally, his DPC of choice is an arterial cannula. And some of our specialists had actually asked, well, why aren't these surgeons doing that? Why aren't they just putting in an introducer sheath? It's so much easier just to pop one in percutaneously. Why are they doing that? And so this may be, be able to give them some answers.
So the pediatric arterial cannulas, they can be placed Seldinger?
They can, because they come in a kit now with introducers that will accommodate a guide wire.
Good. All right. And last but not least, we appreciate all the great discussion. But up next, we have our next champion of this amazing work group, Dustin, who is going to give us some ELSO updates.
Howdy, everyone. I'm Dustin Money. I'm Senior ECMO Specialist at the University of Virginia. My other hat is I'm a chair of a new ELSO committee, which is the Registry Quality Subcommittee. So our whole goal of this new committee is to look at the registry data that exists and how do we take that registry data to benchmark programs. Additionally, how do we use the new DOMO quality improvement dashboard to compare programs and make it really useful for end centers. If you have not logged on to the DOMO platform, I invite you and ask you and request of anyone in this meeting, email me. Tell me what you think about it. Tell me what's lacking about it. We want to make it better for the end user. I came into this with the platform already built. This committee came afterwards to try to make these things better. I know that it lacks a lot. It right now only looks at complications. It looks at mortality rate. You can look at your pumps and your oxygenators, but it doesn't tell you manufacturer data, which ELSO is not allowed to do. And you can also look at pre-intervention, post-intervention stuff. Right now, that's where we're at. We're coming up with more filters. We're coming up with new things. I will tell you some really hot things coming down the pike. June 1st, adjusted mortality rate is going to be released on the platform. This is using AI modeling. If you've not read the paper from Stevens and colleagues in 2023, Intensive Care Medicine, ECMO PAL, the predictive algorithm for ECMO, 18,000 patients in the ELSO registry, VA ECMO, a mortality algorithm that's being used. That is the background of where the adjusted mortality and the new platform is coming from. So if you want to understand where the adjusted mortality numbers are coming from, please read that paper. May 1st, I'm going to see what some of the preliminary stuff comes from the DOMO team, what the new visualizations will look like, what the new modeling will look like, and we plan to be live for the community by June 1st. We have some other fixes, things like we're working on the tables on the platform to make them more user-friendly so you can actually see the benchmarks themselves instead of having to fish around and look for things. But I need to hear from the community. ELSO does not rely on one voice. It likes aggregate voices. The more people that come to me and say, hey, this doesn't work, I don't like this, this is what my program uses, the more argument that I have to come to the table to promote change. And so I ask of this group here regionally, please hit me up and tell me what's wrong so that we can try to fix it. The next thing are peer groups. Currently, you can peer group yourself against a like center, your platinum center, your gold center, a silver center. You're in North America, you're high volume, low volume, medium volume. Those are what we currently have. We're eventually trying to develop a regional peer groups. They kind of already exist. UK has a small group. There's also peer groups that are related for like, I'm an HCA hospital. I can look at all my other HCA hospitals together. What we're talking about are not like centers. Groups in this room, for instance, coming together to have a regional peer group. We're a little bit of ways from that. The adjusted mortality takes priority first. They get that live on the platform. The fixes need to come next that makes things better for the end user. In the background, we're also working on these regional peer groups. I need to find a way to we want to maintain anonymity. So things like tables, it all sounds really simple, but if you have a low N, we have to somehow protect that. Other centers can't see other people's data, really. So we're coming up with like, is it an asterisk or does it just say null when you don't have enough numbers or cases less than 10? We're coming up with rules of the road. How many centers to be a peer group? We're throwing in ideas, 5 or 10. What sort of data can the other peer groups look at together? When you join a peer group, what's the process? You know, we don't want to make, the ELSO DUA currently covers the use of regional peer groups, but we want to make it so that the coordinator, the medical director are signing off without necessarily signing their names, so they're not breaking any rules of not being the authorized signer for their institution. What's the next kind of big thing that we're working on with that? Regional peer groups, authors, number of centers. Oh, how long? So when you've signed up, basically said, hey, I want to be a peer group, we're coming, does that mean you sign on for 2 years or 5 years? What happens when somebody wants to leave? These are all the things that we're trying to work through as a committee to come up with the rules of the road. Honestly, I think it's probably going to be close to about a year and a half before I can actually get things up and running. ELSO, I love it, but ELSO is, things take very slow. Everything moves slowly. But if you have ideas of what we can do to make things better or rules of the road for the peer groups, let me know. And that's really all I have for updates. Any questions? No.
Thank you, Dustin. Eve, what do you got?
Well, I was gonna ask Dustin if in future he would consider providing some kind of like workshop material for those centers that aren't currently centers of excellence, but maybe interested in applying for that standard of practice. It's just, I'm literally just brainstorming here. It just came to me. So maybe Dustin and Brandi and John can put their heads together and, provide some background information for those centers that aren't currently recognized to get their recognition.
I think that'd be a good idea. I mean, we know we have quite a few people that work in our organization that have been taking on Center of Excellence since the beginning of the program. I definitely would I'm going to reach out to them and talk to them and see how they'd feel about participating in a work group. Also, as a whole, starting to do stuff like that. Just a couple months ago, we had a webinar to try to show people the appropriate way to, different ideas to how you collect your registry data. I think also starting to branch out a lot more with different communications of opening up that we're going to have a webinar of the quality improvement dashboard. I think more of those things are coming. And so regionally it'd be nice to do something like that, but also through the organization. And I'm pretty sure in the next 6 months to a year, you'll start seeing stuff like that as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We just submitted our Center of Excellence application and it is so much work. So any tips and hints on that is great. Anyone else?
I just want to applaud you guys for this meeting. What a fantastic start. And I think you're off to a running start. And I just want to encourage anybody in the meeting to reach out to your colleagues and other folks that that are practicing ECMO clinicians and get them to join in and come in person if you can, because I definitely will next time.
Thanks, Eve. Yeah, agreed. Invite people, your whole team, anyone that wants to come and participate. It's great to hear other physicians, other voices. So with that, we're going to kind of talk about open discussion. There's two main things that I really want to ask everybody and see if we can get some volunteers for. So like I said, we talked about when we started this, kind of going through everyone's program structure to compare, see what's different, see what works and doesn't work. Does anyone want to volunteer for the next meeting with a TBD? We're not sure when we'll have that, but volunteer to present your ECMO program structure. Looking online and in person.
We would be happy to at UVA.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, this is Brian at UVA. We would be happy to present the next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Okay. And then the next ask is for Journal Club. Anybody who wants to present a case review or Journal Club presentation to share with the group. So it's kind of funny. Everyone's looking around at each other in the room right now.
Yeah, we could send out an email after a while, Brandi, and just ask somebody maybe through email
Yeah, that's
as well
a good idea.
to hit you up with a current study or a paper. This is an informal group. I hope that others will feel at ease presenting things that they find interesting. John set a high bar. for us,
Well,
but
we can figure it out. I'll follow up with an email and catch
Thanks.
everybody's attention
Yeah.
and see who would like to volunteer. Dustin just kind of volunteered, so we'll see if I throw it on him or not. We talked about last week between Eve and myself the thought of holding a workshop with this group. If that is something that people would be interested in, it would obviously need in-person participation. So that's kind of the big kicker. We would love to have like loads of people there, right? And then we can have everybody kind of send, their thoughts of what they want to cover. What kind of workshops do we want to do? We could maybe invite ELSO to come, like the president of ELSO to come and speak and kind of do some things with the group and the team. And then, we can do something in like a wet lab or whatever kind of interests that the group has. So it was my idea to maybe see if there could be like host sites every time we do this. And so I have reached out. Nice. I have reached out to our simulation center at VCU, and they seem more than willing to hold it on a Saturday, which I know nobody wants to spend their weekend doing work stuff, but it's very difficult to get people to travel during the week. So I would also like to see some interest, yeses or nos, for a weekend workshop. Yays, nays, yays. Okay. Cool. Okay. That's kind of time, right, Sherry? Awesome. Thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate it. We're going to try to keep this ball rolling, and we'll send out the next invite for when we plan the next meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Brandi. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, John, for a wonderful evening. Thank you all for coming and joining us. For those of you who are online, you are missing all the delicious food. Too bad on you. Shame on you. See you next time. I will send out the recording. Is it okay to share the slides as well? And I'll also send out a survey just to see where we can go next. But thank you all for all you do. For those of you who are attending the VCSQI meeting, we will sign back on at 5:30 p.m. And Eve, I saw you come off mute. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Great meeting. Thank you, Brandi. Thank you, Sherry and Eddie, for the platform.
Yeah, this was fun. Okay, have a good day, everyone.